Imagine a woman's head, severed at the neck, floating through the absolute dark. Beneath her, internal organs drag like wet rope. She is hunting. This map shows the geography of Southeast Asia. Notice how aggressively these regions are separated by vast oceans and dense mountain ranges. Yet somehow, across Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, Bali, and Cambodia, 5 completely different civilizations independently described that exact same nightmare. In every single version of the folklore, she bypasses standard prey. She strictly hunts the blood of new life, sleeping pregnant women, unborn children. When you strip away the local languages and hundreds of years of independent history, you are left with a highly specific, nearly identical creature. How does a fear this precise travel across thousands of miles of water and jungle? When a monster perfectly replicates itself across the borders of 5 distinct cultures, it points to a common root. A shared trauma old enough to have traveled with an entire civilization. We start in the remote agrarian villages of Thailand. Here, she is called the Krasue. Condemned by a broken oath or failed magic, her head detaches at night, glowing faintly. For centuries, rural farmers have mistaken her luminous organs for swamp gas or distant lanterns. The Krasue is unique in one specific way. She rarely haunts alone. Local mythology pairs her with a male spirit called the Krahang, who flies on rice winnowing baskets. Move south into Malaysia, and the name changes to the Penanggalan. The core threat remains, but the folklore adapts to local domestic habits. When the Penanggalan returns from hunting, she soaks her trailing organs in vats of vinegar to shrink them enough to fit back inside her empty body. The Malaysian defense against her is brutal. If villagers find her empty shell during the night, they pack the neck cavity with broken glass. When she attempts to reattach at dawn, the glass shreds her internal organs. You can see the pattern already. The monster adapts to the immediate physical reality of the local village, taking on the traits of domestic life, while the core biological threat stays entirely intact. Cross the sea to the Philippines, and the anatomy shifts slightly. The Manananggal tears in half at the waist, sprouting bat-like wings. She targets elevated bamboo huts, extending a long, hollow tongue through the thatched rooftops to reach the sleeping families inside. She belongs to a broader class of shapeshifters known as the Aswang. But the Manananggal is the most feared of them all because she specifically targets the most vulnerable phase of human life, the final moments before a child is born. Further south in Bali, the Leyak exists as a soldier in a formalized system of cosmic warfare, deeply embedded in public ritual and trance dances, where good violently confronts evil. The Leyak serves a demon queen named Rangda, directly opposing the protective spirit Barong. And there is a strict geographic rule here. Her dark magic is completely neutralized if she ever leaves the island of Bali. Finally, we trace the myth to the ancient Khmer civilization of Cambodia. The Op is driven by a tragic, inescapable mechanism. She cannot die and enter the cycle of reincarnation until she successfully passes her curse to another woman, usually her own daughter. This creature is deeply entwined with Khmer identity. After the systematic cultural repression of the Khmer Rouge regime ended, one of the very first stories Cambodian filmmakers chose to reclaim and put back on screen was the Op. Whether filtered through a Filipino shape-shifting taxonomy or an elaborate Balinese religious war, the result is identical. 5 nations built different cages for the exact same monster. This map illustrates the primary scholarly explanation for how the myth moved. 5,000 years ago, the Austronesian expansion began, with seafaring peoples migrating out of Taiwan and carrying their language, agriculture, and fears across the Philippine and Indonesian archipelagos. Later, sprawling Hindu-Buddhist empires built a massive trade network, layering over those ancient migration paths. As merchants moved silk and spices from the islands back into mainland Southeast Asia, their nightmares traveled with them. But tracking trade routes only explains the physical movement of the story. It entirely fails to explain its lasting psychological power. A myth only takes root in a new culture if the people there actually need it to explain their own reality. All 5 of these pre-modern societies shared the exact same traumatic need. Before modern medicine, every one of these cultures faced an unbearable biological constant: high rates of maternal death in childbirth, stillbirths, infants who simply stopped breathing in the middle of the night. These tragedies were incredibly common, and they demanded an explanation. The floating head provided a tangible, external villain to blame for the random, meaningless cruelty of biology. And the monster wears a woman's face because it represents a specific, devastating betrayal. The maternal body, the very thing that is supposed to create and nurture life, is imagined as destroying it instead. That anxiety is still alive today. In rural Thailand, pregnant women hang thorny branches near their windows. Malaysian mothers check the air for the smell of vinegar. And in the Philippines, lines of salt are poured across windowsills. This floating head is a shared human coping mechanism. 5 countries dreamed the same monster because 5 countries faced the exact same grief, and they used this image to give shape to the dark.